Yo everybody, what's going on? This is Keegan from Kman Reviews. If you enjoyed this review, make sure you hit that like and the subscribe button. And if you have any opinions at all that you would like to share, make sure to leave them down in the comment section. Panic at the Disco. Viva Las Vengeance. Panic at the Disco is the now solo project of American singer-songwriter Brendon Urie. While this new era of Panic has been pretty much berated by everyone online, I've been holding some of that music pretty close. I especially think that last album, Pray for the Wicked, gets a bit too much hate, but that may just be my undying love for pop music. But now, 4 years later, we finally see the follow-up to that album, Viva Las Vengeance. Been pretty hyped to listen to this, even though I heard none of the singles prior to this release. And let's just dive in. What are my thoughts on Viva Las Vengeance? Let's find out as I review it track by track. We will start with the singles, with there being 4 of them. The first being the title track and opener of Viva Las Vengeance, which instantly deviates itself from the pop stylings of the last album, Pray for the Wicked, letting in this pounding drum and scratchy guitar that I feel like they could have got on a Strokes album. When the verse starts, it's actually a pretty catchy song. The vocal melody is solid, Brendon's lower vocal tone is a decent compliment, and while I do think the harmonizing backup singers are a bit of an odd addition, they add a good bit of volume, especially for the chorus, which has Brendon reaching into his higher register as he usually does, which, trust me, will be a complaint later, but for this song it's not that bad. I also do like the usage of brass and strings for the final chorus, ends the track on a high note with some minor theatrics, which we'll definitely see more of those down the track list. Lyrically, the song sees Brendon strung and worn out from the fame in his Las Vegas hometown. All in all, a decent way to kick off the album. The second single, Middle of a Breakup, is a song I've seen quite a lot of people completely shit on. Frankly, I don't hate it that much, and a lot of that comes from Brendon himself. I think he sells the track very well with his chorus melody being one of the catchiest on the album. His vocals are also one of the most tolerable efforts here too, plus the instrumental is also pretty fun. Much like the opener, I get a bit of Strokes vibes from this, at least from the percussion, which is fairly dominant in the mix. The guitar has a bit of that retro funk, a very snappy rhythm to this one. The lyrics, yeah, they're not that good, but to me they don't kill the track at all, especially with the chorus as infectious and honestly chantable as this one. Yeah, I think this one's also pretty good. The third single, Sad Clown, is not it. A lot of people compare this album to Queen's sound, and while I didn't catch that for the opening stretch, I definitely do for this one. Brendon's vocals just cannot stack up. He tries to reach the opulence of Freddie Mercury's vocals, but he doesn't have the power to back up his amazing range, so his shrieks just come off more like Adam Levine, which are painful to say the least. And on the opposite end, when he tries to get into a more captivating, kind of operatic deep timbre, it just sounds dumb, especially with the backup harmonies trying to mimic those signature Queen harmonies. Looking away from Brendon's extremely shoddy vocals, the instrumental is fine. I like the peppy snare, but the rest of it is overly theatrical with minimal substance, so it just comes off like a sad nothing trying to be all showy and grand. And it just can't. No thank you on this one. Pass. And the fourth and final single, Don't Let the Light Go Out, is hands down the highlight of this album for me. And I think 90% of that comes down to the vocal and guitar melody, bearing a striking resemblance to Can't Smile Without You from Barry Manilow, and I absolutely adore that song, and no surprise, I like its influence here on this one as well. Brendon's vocals are also pretty great here. I think he could have toned the squeal in the chorus down a bit. I don't think it needed to be that sharp, but it's grown on me, so I'm not cringing every time it comes up anymore. Lyrically, the song is actually pretty heartfelt, dealing with this double-edged sword relationship, just fresh off a breakup and feeling hopeless, but the relationship in question was pretty toxic. A lot of arguments, possibly traumatizing events were taking place, but our narrator seems to experience some Stockholm syndrome in that he wants that attention and affection still. I can't gush about this song enough. One of Panic's best later career songs in my opinion. Now for the rest of the tracks. Local God is fine. I think the instrumental in this one is definitely the best part. That sticky yet sharp guitar lick is very appealing, and the shaker-assisted percussion and bass only help solidify the groove here. I do think Brendon could have done a bit better vocally here. He never overdoes it on this one, but it just seems like he's trying to be loud for the sake of being loud. Or hell, maybe it's him trying to push these petty and bitter as fuck lyrics to the forefront, which almost seemed to be a dig at the early days of Panic and the members that used to occupy that space, specifically guitarist Ryan Ross. Also him exposing how livid he is that he isn't fully famous yet. Not the best light to paint yourself in there. Again, fine track sonically, but I'm likely not going to return to it. Star Spangled Banner is probably one of the worst tracks I've heard from Panic in, honestly, maybe ever. This is pretty bad. It dives fully into the Queen pastiche with this chantable harmonized chorus and the piano embellishment with drumstick clicking during the verses, plus this solo that's trying way too hard to come off as powerful or emotionally resonant. Also, these lyrics are trash. It's trying desperately to come off like this rags to riches story, but there's no rags to be seen. Instead, our narrator comes off more like a self-centered upper-class jackass who bullshit his way through school and is now on top of the world. I'm sorry, but that's not the kind of person that I want to be chanting along with. This one's a hard pass for me. God Killed Rock and Roll is basically this album fully expressing its love for the rock opera, firstly stealing from Bohemian Rhapsody, and it is strikingly obvious, from the a cappella intro to the soft piano transitioning into the first verse, to Brendan's sparse vocals to the scratchy guitar solo. The first half of this track reeks of Queen influence. The second half, however, shows Brendan is into more than just Queen for his rock operas. He also likes Meatloaf because the snappiness of the beat change, light guitar licks, and the change in tempo remind me of the more upbeat moment from Paradise by the Dashboard Light. Even the slowdown where Brendan chants the title of the song reminds me of Paradise's chorus. So basically the track spliced elements from two of the most powerful operatic tracks of the 70s into one modern amalgamation, but with mediocre writing and forgettable vocals. I'd just rather listen to the original tracks over this. Say It Louder is probably one of the better tracks here, but I'm still pretty lukewarm on it overall. Let's start with the positives. The guitar work on this one is pretty great, and especially the solo right before the final chorus is pretty satisfying. So are these twinkly keys. Some of the melodies in this one are pretty good too. I do like the pre-chorus one a lot, but my biggest issue with this track is the mixing is extremely compressed. I didn't even really realize it until I heard the last chorus emerge from the emptiness. But there isn't much impact to the overall sound and just kind of feels muffled, which is also the same for Brendan's voice. In a way, it's kind of an ironic title. This one definitely had potential and some decent ideas, but the final result came off more like a mixed bag. Sugar Soaker is another track that I feel like has potential. It has a very nostalgic, kind of crunchy riff that reminds me of some classic rock, a style that I really enjoy, along with some fluttering keys and punchy snare. It's an all-around solid instrumental, but this just has little tidbits here and there that just bother me. The biggest one being the come on, come ons that blast at the end of the chorus, completely changing the tempo and allowing the drummer to go buck wild on the kit. It is a jarring transition and does not feel that nice. Another minor thing that irks me is Brendan trying to fit in with the times. He gains a bit of a gristly growl every now and then, and it does not suit him, along with the brief squeals he lets out. It adds up to a clunky vocal performance all around. As a whole for this one though, it's probably the most inoffensive track on the album. I do see a lot of people liking or at least tolerating this one, and I'm kind of in that same field. Something About Maggie definitely has a satisfying, triumphant swing to it, accented by some pleasing brass work and trumpets and tubas all over a pretty saccharine pop rock instrumental, probably one of the most outwardly enjoyable instrumentals on the album. But yet again, much like the rest of the tracks, this is just hampered by baffling choices that don't make up much of the song, but leave a lasting, ruinous effect. For one, fractured choruses haven't been my cup of tea ever, and this one has one of those. The sudden rising triplet melody followed by a deeper timbre kills the vibe of the track for me, and Brendan really piles on the lavish, over-exaggerated falsettos, especially for that chorus, hands down just the worst part of the song. Just another track that has good intentions, but flops on the execution. All By Yourself is trying to be this sentimental power ballad, but the instrumental just does not stack up, and the only power to even come out of this track is the smothering vocal harmonies for the chorus. They are just so much in the mix that you can barely make out anything aside from the drums. Speaking of vocals, they're actually pretty solid, if again mixed a bit poorly. Brendan's falsettos are done tastefully, and he doesn't really sound like he's straining as much. Unfortunately, that above-average vocal performance gives way to some pretty bad lyrics. I mean, I don't want to ever hear Brendan call me a sweet little kitten ever again. Aside from that, though, probably one of the better cuts at the end of the day. And finally, the closer, Do It to Death, is one of the strangest closing tracks I've heard in a while. Kind of gives me the vibe of a silly song that closes out a weekly sitcom episode. It feels like a parody. Brendan really likes to stick to his higher register on this one, not absurdly high or anything, but it is up there and gets tedious a minute in, which is such a shame because the instrumental is pretty fun. The stamping percussion and riff carry a sweet melody that makes it pretty infectious, but man, this string-dominated outro at the end with Brendan closing the album by saying "shut up and go to bed" may be one of the worst ways to finish an album I've heard this year. Normally I love strings closing out an album, but this one feels so forced, like it had to come to a resonant end, and just serves for an awkward transition. It's solid overall, but I'm definitely not returning to the full thing. Overall, I mean, I kind of expected this to not be good, and my expectations were met. I did like some of the tracks, though, especially that opening stretch I thought was pretty great, but after that, the album just went down a waterfall of mediocrity and never truly resurfaced, cluttered by some weird mixing choices, inconsistent vocals, and instrumentals that should have been given to other artists to do more with. Yet despite all that, there were very few tracks that were like actually irredeemable. I can absolutely see how some people could like this album, but at least for me, hands down the weakest solo Panic album. I'm feeling a 4.5 out of 10 on this album. Well guys, hope you enjoyed that review. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.